Podsters, we're going to jump right into it. There's an expression out there, and the expression is that feedback is a gift. I have been known to say this on more than one occasion. And I do believe that feedback is a gift, usually, most of the time, if we're understanding it for what it is. And I'm talking about feedback from anyone, by the way, from your partner, from a client, from a boss, from your kids, a customer, a random stranger. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter who we're talking about. What matters is, how are you taking the feedback? How are you taking it in? How are you processing it? And what are you doing with the information? And to me, the how much value you put on the feedback is more important in most cases than the feedback. And I'm going to get into this as we progress. You know, when I was first starting out as a leader, I got incredible feedback, and it changed the trajectory of my career for sure. And I'm incredibly grateful. This was a gift. And I'll tell you what the feedback was, because this ties into the pursuit of perfection. So this is when I was just stepping into my first leadership role, and it was going to be a fairly big team. And my boss at the time happened to be the one interviewing me, which happens often when there are reorgs, which happens often in big companies. Anyway, we were going through a reorg, and I had the interview, and I said to my boss at the time, who was interviewing me for the next job, and by the way, it was highly competitive. It wasn't a perfunctory interview. It was a real interview. And I said to her, you know me really well. You know me probably the best out of anyone. What do you think is going to be my biggest obstacle if I get the job? And she said, actually, I said when I get the job. But anyway, she said, you are not always going to have the answers. And if you don't get comfortable with that, that's going to hold you back. And what she meant was, I'm not always going to have answers. Sometimes I need to take all of the best information and make a decision. I can't let my keen interest in knowing the answer stop me from growing, progressing, making decisions, leading a team. And I thought that was really interesting, because that was the first time I had heard that. And it was excellent feedback. And she was right. I don't like not having the answer. I hate it, actually. That's why when I start a new role, the first 3 to 6 months, as you all know, you don't have the answers. And that's incredibly frustrating for me. It's more frustrating for me than other people, some other people, I think, just because of how I'm wired. And I am aware of that now. And I know that I need to tamp that. I can't get too frustrated. I can't, slow things down. And it's not that I'm afraid to ask a question. I'm never afraid to ask a question. It's that I want to be helpful, and I want to be a good resource. And if I don't have the answer, I equate not having the answer with not being helpful and not being a good resource. That's not necessarily true. That's a whole nother podcast episode. So the moral of the story is that the feedback was, you're not always going to have the answers. And if you don't check that, and if you don't really understand that, it's going to impact your ability to lead. Great feedback. That feedback was a gift. Okay. As a speaker, as a woman in public office, as a CEO, as a wife, as a stepmom, I've gotten my fair share of feedback. And not all of it has been gold. Not all of it has been a gift. Not all feedback is a gift. So how you filter through what to pay attention to, or really what gets your attention and your energy, and what you simply use as a data point, what to keep, what to toss, if you will. Looking at the feedback as a data point, and then how much value you put on that data point, will be really helpful. Because if you shy away from the feedback, and if you unilaterally disregard the feedback, well, that's not really helpful either. If you don't want the feedback because you think it's criticism, which if it's delivered properly, it's not, it's simply feedback. It's not good or bad. It is simply an opinion. So if you can filter through what gets headspace and what doesn't, that will make you more open to the feedback, which will make you a better person, a better leader, a better wife, a better mother, all of those things, because the feedback's important depending on a few things. And I'm going to talk about those 3 things in just a minute. So these are the 3 tips I use when thinking about feedback that I've been given. And I want to talk for a minute about this concept of growing thick skin, because that's not what I mean here. When I ran for public office, and by the way, a public office position, an entertainer, even a public speaker, when you're talking to large groups of people, you set yourself up for everybody to think that it's okay to share their opinion with you. And it is that, this is why I'm here. This is why I ran for public office. This is why I'm a speaker. I want to hear what's going on. I want to know what's happening. I want to know what you think. And in the beginning, someone whose opinion I really respect said, "Oh, I said, I need to get thicker skin." And he said, "You'll grow it. You'll grow thicker skin." And then I thought about it. And I thought to myself, I don't I don't think I want thicker skin because I don't want the feedback to just bounce off. I don't want the feedback not to get through. I don't want to prevent it. I want to be able to process it in a way that's healthy and in a way that doesn't impact my ability to make clear decisions, doesn't impact my ability to embrace who I am, and doesn't impact my ability to change. Some of the feedback should be the catalyst for change. Sure. Some of it should be taken as a data point and then I move on. Another expression out there that I used to really like is that what you think about me is none of my business. And I've been known to say that. I'm going to repeat it. What others think about me is none of my business. And it's kind of a catch-all for when, listen, you do you, boo. You do you, and you can't worry about what other people think. Correct. Yes, that's accurate. I also think it can become a slippery slope. Of course, it's your business what other people think about you. Perseverating over it, or being obsessed with it, or having it be paralyzing or crippling what other people think of you. No, that's not healthy. Neither is not regarding it at all. So there has to be some kind of an in between. Of course, we care how people view us or what they think. And at the same time, the amount of weight that we put on the feedback, the amount of attention that we give the feedback, mind space, that should be commensurate with how important you feel that perspective is. I'm going to say that again. The amount of value you place on the feedback that you are given should be commensurate with how important you feel that person's perspective is. Because not many people in your life can be purely objective. We all have our own perspectives. We all have our own intentions. We all have our own needs and desires, which brings me to the number one filter that I use when processing feedback. The number one thing is what is this person's intent? Is this person sharing what they're sharing because they want me to be better? Because they support me and they're pointing out a blind spot, because they think I can do something better and they want me to be better, improve. The person whose feedback I value the most is my partner, my husband, Danny. And his feedback is usually pure. It is coming from the intention of he wants me to be better. He wants to support me. And even if it's feedback I don't want to hear, I really try to remember that, okay, his intent here is to help me improve. He could be on base, he could be off base. What's the intent? And then I'll use that when I'm processing through the feedback. On the flip side, there are people out there who share feedback because they have their own agenda. Their intent is to try to get me to do something. Their intent is to make themselves feel better. Their intent is to disguise criticism as feedback, or to disguise pettiness or nastiness as feedback. That doesn't happen to me a lot. I'm very fortunate in that. Or maybe it does, and I just don't pay it as much attention. When you think about your boss, if your boss is giving you feedback, usually it's to help you improve. And rarely is it petty. Same thing with your partner. You can't say that about all of your colleagues, though. You can't say that about all of your clients or your customers. Sometimes the feedback is meant to be hurtful. And that's feedback that I try to take it as a data point, because there might be some truth to what they're saying, and move on. So it's really viewing it as a data point. And I try to filter the feedback that I receive through their lens. And because I get a lot of it. And I've been getting a lot of it lately in this new role that I have in a public office. And I value it. I want it. I set myself up to receive it. I have specific times where people come in and tell me what's going on and how they're feeling. And, sometimes that involves how they feel about me and the job I'm doing. I want to know. I was elected. I want to know how I'm doing. And I also keep in mind that this is their lens. This is their perspective, which is important. Their perspective is important, and looking at the data that they are giving me as this is through their lens is incredibly helpful so that I can not internalize it, that I can use it as a data point and then be able to move on. And I'm not saying don't care. I'm not saying that at all. I'm not saying let it bounce off. I'm saying don't let it soak all the way in and understand that it's someone's point of view. That's all. It doesn't make it real. It doesn't make it real. It makes it one data point. So, when you look at feedback too from family, it's interesting. Look at the feedback from, let's say it's a sibling, okay, and they're sharing something, or even your partner if you've been with your partner for a while. They have their own baggage. They have their own relationship with you baggage that they're bringing into the feedback. So they have their own issues that they're bringing in when they're sharing the feedback. And for me, usually it's a very constructive conversation. But, keep in mind that that's not always going to be the case. If you have a sibling that you have a rivalry with, or someone in your family who resents something that you have or something that you've done, and then they share this feedback with you, understand that this could be contributing to where they're coming from. And this is their perspective. She always does this. She always acts like this. Those sentences, those statements that include always, never, those aren't helpful necessarily because you don't always do that. It's not always. And that's about the behavior rather than about how it's making them feel. So all of this is to say, Podsters, it is very healthy to care about feedback. Absolutely. And at the same time, it's important to not let it affect your mental health, which is hard, especially if you get it a lot, if you receive feedback a lot in your role, if you are a front-facing customer service person, if you have children who feel that they should, can, and will give you their opinions about you whenever possible, if you have a critical parent, if you have a boss wants you to get better, or a boss maybe who doesn't want you to get better, whatever the case may be. If you have a boss, if you have somebody that's comfortable with feedback, they're going to give feedback a lot and understand that it's comfortable for them, even though it may be uncomfortable for you. And again, I go back to intent. So let's talk about the three things or the 3 points that I consider when I'm looking at feedback. So the first thing is, what do I think about this person's opinion? My husband's a great example. I value his opinion. Do I value this person's opinion? Do they understand the situation? Do they understand why I took the action I did, or why I said what I said, or why my opinion is what it is? Do they understand the context? Again, really, it's do I value their opinion? And just because you're offering feedback doesn't mean I need to absorb it. I need to hear it and I need to listen to it, treat it as a data point. And at the same time, if I think it's jaded, if I think your perspective is skewed, if I think you don't understand really everything that needs to be understood, I'll have that conversation, or I'll try to have that conversation. So, do I value this person's opinion? That's number one. Number two, what is their intent? We talked about that a few minutes ago. Is their intent to help me? Is their intent to point out a blind spot? I mean, that's the best feedback. When somebody says, hey, listen, I need you to see this because I don't know if you see this. Do you see this? And if they don't, and if the person you're giving the feedback to doesn't, then that's a huge, huge benefit. It's a blind spot. You won't see it unless they point it out. So impact versus intent, or just intent. What's their intent? And if their intent is not pure, I use that when looking at the data point. The third thing I look at, which I referenced earlier a little bit, is their lens. What's their lens? What's their filter? How are they approaching this situation? what's their perspective really is what I'm looking at. And then I can take their feedback, layer in their perspective, and take what I need from it and take what I think will be helpful. So all of this is to say, I do think that feedback is a gift. I strongly believe that. And I think that our ability to process the feedback and value the feedback in a constructive manner and then move on is an incredibly powerful skill that a lot of people don't have. And it's one that I work on all the time. And it's one that I think if we can master that, you really, yeah, bring it on. What do you think? Whatever you think, let's hear it, because you're going to be able to filter through what you think is going to have the most impact on how you're showing up. And that's really the beauty. Before we go, Podsters, I'm going to talk a little bit about giving feedback. And I think I did a whole episode on this a long time ago. The number one thing to think about, consideration, I think, when giving someone feedback is, are they in a place where they can hear it? Will they hear you? And I ask them that. I will ask that. I will ask it of my partner. I'll ask it of a colleague. Hey, are you open to some feedback on this right now? They could, let's say I say to Danny, hey, I have some feedback on how you handled that. Do you think you're in the right mindset to talk about it right now? I have literally said this. Are you in the right headspace for us to talk about it right now? And 9 times out of 10, he'll say yes. The 1 or 2 times that he says no, I'm like, okay, great. Then let's talk about it another time. And it comes up at another time and he's more in the right headspace to absorb it. Because if you share the feedback without asking, first, you might take them off guard. Second of all, they might not be in the right headspace to hear you. And then that's a shame because you're going out on a limb to offer the feedback. And if they're not able to really process it, then it's a waste. And it's just a waste of time. And it could actually backfire and they could just think you're out to get them or whatever the case may be. And you're not. You're simply sharing the feedback. There's actually in the movie, it was the movie with Rachel Dratch. It was a bunch of women in Sonoma. I can't remember the name of the movie. And she played a psychologist. And she said this so many times in the movie, it became hilarious. When they were walking, she would say, can I offer you some feedback? And she would say it in this really sweet way. And, I think that's the best way to do it is, hey, I'd like to offer you some feedback. Is now a good time? I'd like to talk to you about something and share some feedback with you. Do you think that you are in the right space to hear me? Usually it's not after something volatile happens. If something happens and there's a big situation, probably not right afterwards. You probably want to wait and have the dust settle a little bit and then provide the feedback. So I would say if you are giving the feedback, number 1, make sure they're in the right headspace. And number 2, if it's negative feedback or if it's feedback that could be perceived as negative, I always try to include some positive. And, there's a lot of approaches to this. There's the sandwich approach, which is positive, negative, positive. So you sandwich the negative in between the 2 positives. That's a technique that's very common, particularly during performance appraisals. I find that's a little too structured. And the reason why I like to provide positive feedback as well as what could be perceived as negative or an opportunity is I don't want them to only hear the negative because that's difficult for a lot of people. And I don't want them to only hear about, here's what I think you could have done better. I want them to understand, I think you do this great. I think you do that great. I think you handled this great. This is a great situation. You handled that perfect. And also, next time you might have a better outcome if you tried blah, 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 and whatever that feedback is. That's just easier to process. And that's a more pleasant conversation. And I think it's also a more productive conversation. So, Podsters, that's my take on feedback. That's what I have for you this week. I love you all. And Podsters, I'm going to peace out. So peace out, and I will see you all next week.